Walking in the Steps of Jesus, a disciple-making trip. So it really started early, from the birth of Jesus through, the death and resurrection. The Israel Dream Trip. It's Hunt for Wellness, episode number 66. Hello, welcome to Hunt for Wellness. I am John Hunt.
And I'm Christy Hunt.
And this is the show where we help you live your best life, mind, body, and spirit. Starting off season 3 here with episode number 66. And this episode is brought to you by waterdistillers.com. Great machines that produce great water for your great wellness. Check it out at waterdistillers.com. The Dream Trip.
Yes.
We got back from the dream trip.
Yes,
Our
we
dream
did.
trip. Not everybody has this dream, but,
right.
Part of what we want to talk about is fulfilling dreams.
Yes.
And so we had the opportunity to go to Israel. It's actually our second opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to give you some highlights from that trip and kind of how it, the show is about mind, body, and spirit, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is.
So how are we tying this in?
So dreams are really an important part. I'm not just talking about dreams in your sleep.
Yeah, or spiritual dreams, right?
Yeah, but just having a dream, having goals, that's a really big part of your life. And when those aren't fulfilled, it actually can be bad for your health.
Right.
And I've heard of people that they get diagnosed with cancer or some bad disease and they're not going to live much longer, and they decide, what the heck, I always wanted to go live by the ocean. Let's just
go live by the ocean.
Sell everything, go live by the ocean. And guess what happens? They get healed because they're so happy and they fulfill their dreams.
Right. Yeah.
So really, these dreams that we have in our hearts are important.
All right.
Important to fulfill.
Right.
So,
Israel's been a dream of ours for a long time.
Long time.
But in 2019, we did go.
Yes.
But, it wasn't long enough. You're so full of information that, we really wanted to go back.
We did. We did.
We were able to do that this year.
Yes, we got the opportunity to go back, and we did. So that's why we just want to share it with you, because it was very significant to us, and it might be significant to you. We've talked to a lot of people said, oh, I would really love to go there. So we're just going to share this, our dream, and also be thinking about, for you, what is your dream?
Right. And we're just going to show a lot of pictures here, some videos from the trip. This is just a small segment. We'd have to do like 10 podcast episodes because we covered a lot in the 2 weeks we were there.
44 sites.
This opening picture here is just, we're on the Mount of Olives. And if you think about the Mount of Olives, it's on the other side of the valley from the Jerusalem. And
yes,
a lot of people, if you look really closely, you can see that gold dome there. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. That's the Dome of the Rock. It's not a mosque. A lot of people think that. But,
yeah. So, by the way, if you're listening to this, it would be better if you watched it on YouTube.
Yeah, or go to the Hunt for Wellness podcast page, episode 66. Yeah, otherwise this could be...
this is recommended.
But we'll talk about a lot of stuff, but we'll do our best to do play-by-play. But yeah, the Mount of Olives, such a significant place. In fact, we went on this trip a couple different times because the trip, let's talk about that, was...
Walking in the Steps of Jesus.
Walking in the Steps of Jesus, a disciple-making trip. So it really started early, from the birth of Jesus through, the death and resurrection.
Yes.
So we did land, we did stay in the old city of Jerusalem, but that first, day, we kind of went over on the Mount of Olives just to get kind of a orientation. And we were going to go back.
Yeah.
So
orientation of the city of Jerusalem.
Of this Jerusalem, and just kind of the overview of what we were going to do on the trip.
Yes.
Our host was Steve Hudson, who's a good friend of ours, pastor, and just been to Israel so many times, lived there actually for a few years. So he just really knows how to do a great trip. So let's take a look at our next picture. And this is, if you look at it, is actually a scale model of Jerusalem in the time of the temple. So if you
it's first century AD.
Yeah. So,
after Jesus, but before the destruction.
Yeah, 70 AD, the temple. So if you see the Temple Mount there right in the front of the picture, that has the temple and the Solomon's colonnade. And, you can read in the Bible and get all the details of this stuff. And this was actually built by Herod. And
well, not this model.
Well, not the model. Yeah. I'm talking about this temple. Because there was a couple temples that were built over the course of time. But Herod was a Jew, but he was also kind of an enemy of the Jews as well. And he was kind of in cahoots with the Romans, who would later basically destroy this. But Herod died, what was it, about 4 BC? So
just
right
shortly
around
after Jesus
shortly
was
after
born.
Jesus was born. Yeah, the dates they're not quite exact there, but
what's cool about this model is you just get a good view of what Israel or Jerusalem looked like, a little bit after Jesus, but it had to be pretty similar to this.
Yeah.
And the temple area is huge.
Yeah.
Because we went up on it, and we'll talk about that a little
later. Yeah,
but it is a huge area, and as you can see that in this model.
Yeah.
So
and the temple. I think Jerusalem is on top of a mountain.
Yes, Mount Moriah.
So they have to get something flat like that. They really had to kind of build around, build a platform to build this Temple Mount on, and then there's a lot of sloping all directions. So
that we went there the first day, and that was really great to get an overview and understanding.
And that was at the Israel Museum, where there was a bunch of all kinds of other stuff exhibits, the Dead Sea Scroll exhibits, and
that's cool.
That is really cool too. So
okay, then we went to Herodium.
Yes, and this is a little scale model of just part of Herodium. Herod, he was a big builder. And he was in charge for a while, and he built 8 different, I don't know if you want to call them resorts or places for him to get away to. He kind of moved around a lot.
Fortresses.
Yeah,
I'd call them fortresses.
Yeah. And Herodium was, again, on top of a hill. But what's significant about the Herodium place is, number one, this is where he built his own burial site. And that's what we see in the model here. This is just part of a much bigger complex, and it sat for many, 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 many years as just a hill because over time, this all gets buried,
gets covered in dirt.
So it wasn't until 2007 that they found actually the grave site. They excavated it down, and I think it was Netzer was his name. He was an archaeologist in Israel. Yeah. And he thought that, if someone like Herod was going to get buried, typically, like when we were over on the Mount of Olives, there was a lot of tombs and graves there because they want to face the Temple Mount. They want to face that direction. So this actually is not that far away from the old city Jerusalem and the Temple Mount. And actually on this side of this hill, it actually faces that. So then on this day, we went back to Jerusalem, and here we are in Hezekiah's tunnel. You can actually read about this in the Bible because Hezekiah was under siege. I think it was by Sennacherib, and sometime around that period, they don't know exactly how this was built, but they built a 1,700 foot long, it's like a third of a mile tunnel out of solid rock. Because remember, everything over in Israel is basically limestone rock. It's, mountains and in this area. So,
and they started on 2 ends. They started on 2 different ends. This tunnel twists and turns, and they met somewhere in the middle, which is like a miracle,
right?
Because there's not like wide open spaces where do we meet the other people? Yeah. This tunnel is a person width wide, and you walk through it. Some parts are very narrow or low, and others are really big, but it is not 2 people wide anywhere.
Right.
It's 1 person wide, and they chiseled it out by hand. Yeah. As I was walking through this tunnel, I'm like, God, how in the world did they do this? And he said, I told him how to do it.
Well,
That's
it's also an
literally
engineering marvel because it has to go from the upper, what they're trying to do is take the water and redirect it into the city, and it had to, go down by like a 1 foot elevation. So they also had to take that into account as well, so this water could flow inside the city walls, so that when the city was under siege, the people inside could still drink the water. Speaking of water, the next day, day 3, we went to the Dead Sea, 1,294 feet below sea level. It is the lowest place on Earth.
And by the way, it was really hot.
Yeah, about 105.
The temperature was 105 degrees there. I don't know how anybody wants to live around there.
And the Dead Sea, the cool thing about that, and you only go in for like 10 minutes at a time, is that you just go in there and you float because there's so much salt.
So many minerals.
And so that was kind of I think this is one of those touristy things you just kind of have to experience.
Yeah, it is really cool to see how you float, and you just automatically float. You don't want to get the stuff in your eyes. You don't splash or anything. So
we will go from there up to the Wadi Kelt, and that is an area. So Jericho is at the desert part, and Jerusalem is up on the top of the mountain, and it's I think it's a 17-mile walk. And, the Wadi Kelt was the road you would have gone on. And we walked a part of it just to get a sense of that. But this particular picture, we're stopping for a little teaching break. But in the background is this monastery, which is, people still are there.
Yeah, St. George's Monastery.
Yeah, it's really cool. Like out in the middle of nowhere. I'm not sure how they function, but they do.
And it was so hot there.
Yes, very hot. You have to appreciate people who walk. I mean, most people would probably take the uphill part of this in 2 days, because to walk it in 17 miles in 1 day would be pretty tough. Day 4, then we actually got up on the Temple Mount, and there's a bunch we could tell about that. I mean, it's a Muslim site. It's controlled by the Muslims now. But there's the Dome of the Rock, which you see in the background of this picture, the one with the gold dome. And that's the place where Muhammad got his night dream or whatever it was, I believe.
Night journey.
His night journey.
It signifies his night journey.
But also on the Temple Mount, we don't have a picture we're showing, but is the
Alexa Mosque.
The Alexa Mosque, which they say is on the edge of the Temple Mount, and that's where it is. So, so in order to go up here, you have to be in Muslim modesty.
You have to be covered, all your arms and legs and everything.
We weren't able to go in either the mosque or the Dome of the Rock building, but it was kind of cool to see that. But there's a lot of controversy over this because they believe that's exactly where that Dome of the Rock is where the temple that we showed you in the early.
It may have been
right in that area.
There,
somewhere,
or it might have been over to the side.
Yeah, but it's kind of interesting.
We don't know exactly where it was
because in 70 AD, not a stone was left.
The temple part was.
They just everything was totally destroyed. We walked out of the north end of that complex and went over to the Church of St. Anne. Actually, it's the Pool of Bethesda is the site there, and that's the one where Jesus healed the paralyzed man in John 5. And but a lot of the sites, I think it was around 300 some BC or 300 AD, the Constantine came in and they put churches in these areas where they thought these significant places were. But this one right here, they actually have excavated part of the Pool of Bethesda. You had to go way down to do it. You remember when
very far down
things get buried, and new cities get built top on cities, and they get cities built on top of them. So you can't like remove somebody's house unless you have the land,
Unless you own the land,
But these churches are still around, and we're just this one church. It's you want to talk about?
So Saint Anne was Mary, mother of Jesus' mother. So it would be Jesus' grandmother, which is really special to my heart because I'm a grandmother now. And so Anne was Jesus' grandmother. And so apparently, according to tradition, this is the area that Mary was born. Don't know for sure. But so there's a church here, a very beautiful church with incredible acoustics.
Yeah, that's, I think, is the most acoustic place in Jerusalem. And when we were in there, we're going to play a little video here of another group, that because you can't teach in there
or talk,
but you can sing. So it is well with my soul, and just very beautiful, wasn't it?
Very.
All right. So then the next day, it's heading north. We're going up north and
to the Galilee.
And on our way there, we stopped off at Nazareth Village, which is a kind of an interesting little recreation of what Nazareth would be like, at the time of Jesus.
Yes.
And they had here just some different actors playing different roles, but she's using and weaving using first century techniques. But it was just a real neat place. And then seeing again how close everything is to each other. I mean, that was Nazareth, and that was really cool. We also went to Sepphoris, which was very close to Nazareth, so Jesus was probably, working there at that time, and so what we saw there was a little bit later period, but we saw mosaics, and these beautiful mosaics that are made by hand with stones that are dyed from different colors from all over the place. Very elaborate and ornate. This is all on our way to Galilee, so we check into the Magdala Hotel on that night, and then we're ready to go the next day, which is Mount Arbel. And Mount Arbel, this you see in this picture here, overlooks the Sea of Galilee. Isn't that an incredible view there?
But what's the real name of that lake?
It's called Lake Kinneret.
Yeah.
Kinneret, yeah. So the other significant thing of this mountain is if you go down to the Sea of Galilee or Lake Kinneret level, that is another kind of critical trade route and lowlands. But you do have this mountain here, and one of the things we did was we, after getting that incredible view, decided to climb down it. Check this video out. Now, most of it was fairly easy to climb down, but a couple of areas like this were maybe a little more difficult.
Yeah, but fortunately they had these wires that you could hang on to and places to put your feet, so it wasn't too scary. It was
also,
fun.
Yeah, on this day we went to Capernaum, which is the place where Peter and a lot of ministry happened around, but Peter lived there. Peter's mother was healed there. Is the excavation of the area in Capernaum where, like Peter's house was. They believe they found a plaque that said Peter lived here.
Yeah.
I don't know what it said, but they're pretty confident. And then what do? They build a church over it, so you kind of look down through the church to see this. But that's just cool. It's just neat to know that on these little walkways here, Jesus probably walked because he did a lot of ministry in Galilee and Capernaum.
Yes, and right by the Sea of Galilee, which they don't call it that anymore.
Yep.
And imagine having your church built over an archaeological site,
right?
where you're worshiping first century people worshipped.
Yeah.
And, that's really pretty incredible.
Yeah. And later in the day, what we were able to do, take a little boat like this, and we got to have a boat ride on Lake Kinneret.
Or the Sea of Galilee.
Now, remember, that's where Jesus was in a boat a lot there. Sometimes he was sleeping during the storms, and that didn't...
he stilled the storms on this lake, this very lake.
This lake is not huge, so... he was always coming and going to the other side. And one side was more, Jewish, and the other side was more pagan or Gentile.
Yes.
And like if the story of the demoniac was over on the pagan side, because he sent the demons into the pigs, and they jumped off the cliff. And we actually got to see where that little cliff probably was. Don't know it for sure, but, it's that area, and it's a steep... decline right down into the water.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and that was cursey.
Yes, and that was really an incredible. All right, next day we're going to the very northern part of Israel, which is where Dan was. But what's significant up here is this is where the Jordan River starts.
Yes,
but this becomes this is the headwaters for like one of the main water sources for the entire country of Israel.
Yes.
I mean, it's pretty incredible. It goes all the way down to the Dead Sea.
It's the largest spring, and we think of spring as very mild.
Yep.
This is literally tons, gallons, thousands of gallons per minute rushing out from this spring.
Yeah. So after that, we decided before we headed out of the Galilee region and headed back to Jerusalem, we were going to stop at the Church of the Primacy. This is another church built to kind of commemorate where Jesus told Peter, do you love me?
Yes.
Feed my sheep. And Jesus reinstates Peter because, he's kind of denied him before, right?
He denied him 3 times.
I mean, this
at
happens
the time.
later on in the ministry, like after he's death and resurrection, that part. But there's a lot of biblical stories on and around the water of the Galilee region.
Yes. Yeah.
So, okay. So then the next day, as we head down, we stop off at Beth Shean, and this is just an incredible excavated site. And what's significant about this area was a huge Roman complex city. Built there because it was kind of at the intersection of the trade roads. And a lot of the retired Roman soldiers would come and live there. But, they have, and this city actually got destroyed by an earthquake. And then over time, never got rebuilt and got covered, and then finally it was uncovered. And I think they started that in 1921. So it sat there for how many thousand years? Mm-hmm. A couple thousand years before it was.
Well, it was destroyed in 749 A.D.
Yeah.
By an earthquake. It had about 35,000 inhabitants, and what they have unearthed is basically like the downtown area, which is a huge area.
Yeah. Just probably a very majestic, very Roman city, and this
very beautiful.
This was the biggest city in what they called the Decapolis, which was 10 cities that the Romans kind of controlled, and that was just an incredible sight to see these huge. You wonder, how did they get these pillars? Because these pillars some of them were not limestone, so they would have had to bring these in through the Mediterranean Sea, like from Italy, let's say, or Rome or wherever, and bring them over and transport them there. So just that whole story is pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So we made it back that afternoon to the Old City in Jerusalem, and you can't talk about the Old City without talking about the Western Wall. So remember the Temple Mount. This is the western wall of it. So if you look at
the western side of the Temple Mount,
and if you look at the very top of that wall, that's where kind of the temple and now the Dome of the Rock is up there. So it's very tall, and
so it's also known as the Wailing Wall.
Yes.
And people will put prayers in the cracks of the wall. They'll go up there and they'll be praying, and they'll put prayers in the cracks. And so you can see little pieces of paper in there. And they believe the divine presence rests there. Mm-hmm. That's what it says on their signage.
Yep. And
they do have security for this area. You have to walk through a security checkpoint to get into this area. And so it was cool to be there. You've probably seen it on TV, on pictures and stuff. Yep. And you can walk right up to the wall. Mm-hmm. I mean, men do have to wear a
head covering, and there's a men's side and a woman's side.
Yes. And so, both of us have been up to the wall, touched the wall, prayed at the wall. It's a neat experience, but, I know where God is, and he's in our hearts.
Right.
He's everywhere.
But this is significant.
It is significant, and it's ancient.
Yep. So the next morning, we hit the ground running, and we go over to Pater Noster Church, which is the church that is known for the remembrance of the Lord's Prayer. We actually did a teaching here on the Lord's Prayer, and what's cool about this place is there's over 200 tile kind of displays of the Lord's Prayer in 200 different languages. Here's the one in Swedish. Mm-hmm. You're going on your Swedish mission trip coming up, and Sweden is, but it's just so cool that prayer has been transcends all languages.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That just shows you kind of how Christianity is.
Yes.
We also that day went to the Holocaust Museum. It's not a historical from the first century, but it is talking about the Holocaust, and we just had to stop by. There's trees planted for all kinds of people that were involved, and this is for Corrie ten Boom.
Yes.
We had to find her tree.
Yeah, so the place is called Yad Vashem. That is the Holocaust Museum, Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance for those in the Holocaust. And then they have this area to remember those that helped the Jews and help those in the Holocaust. And Corrie and her sister Elizabeth and her father Casper are remembered with this tree. And each tree in the whole place is planted for a person or a family that helped the Jews. And so, interestingly, Corrie's tree died the year she died. And so they replanted another tree for her. Yeah. So this is a younger tree, but she had one before that. So it was really neat to see that.
It died because there was like snow, and they hardly ever get snow there.
Yeah.
So that was kind of interesting.
Yes.
All right, the next day we're back over on the Mount of Olives and the Garden of Gethsemane. We're getting near to where it's the last days of Jesus. And this is just kind of, you can see the Dome of the Rock through this window here in this church. But what's so cool about the Mount of Olives is there's what? Olive trees there.
Yes.
This one right here is really old. I don't know how old it is. Probably not 2,000 years old, but and Gethsemane, the Garden of Gethsemane is where the wine or the olive oil was made. It was an industrial area too. So you had olive trees there and olive presses, and Gethsemane means oil press or oil stores. And in Hebrew, it's gat shemanin. So it's very, that's why it was called that. People would know that Gethsemane would be where olive trees were back in that time, and they're still there. And there's some beautiful gardens there that we got to walk through. And, Jesus wept there. And
Jesus was, the olive garden, or the olive presses wouldn't be working at that point. They would be kind of abandoned because they are worked in the fall time. Actually, now is about the time that they harvest the olives and press them. But when they do an olive pressing, they press the olives 3 times. Mm-hmm. And just like Jesus prayed 3 times.
For the cup to be taken.
Yeah, they liken it to that. So
and so when he was arrested, he was taken in front of several different leaders, and one was Caiaphas. Mm-hmm. We're not going to get into all the details of that, but this is a place they have excavated that they believe was Caiaphas. They call it Caiaphas's house, but it was probably his office or where he judged, criminals. And what's interesting is there's a shaft that goes from the upper level down into the what you might call the dungeon, because they don't want to have to deal with these people or touch them if they're unclean.
Well, they don't want to be in their presence and be unclean and not be able to eat the Passover.
Yes.
So instead of having them in the same room with them, they have them down in this kind of holding dungeon that they let them down into through a hole, and then they speak to them through the hole, and therefore they're not in the same room, but they can talk. Yeah. And
this is very possibly where Jesus was.
Yes.
And right outside, there's a beautiful church here, but there's also a first century road that was excavated out, and so who knows? Jesus could have walked on this.
Most likely he did. Which is really cool to think about.
Really cool. All right, we're getting close to our last day. If you look closely at this, you can maybe see a couple eyes and a nose. Maybe it looks like a skull even.
The nose is a little bit harder.
Yeah,
over time it's kind of eroded.
Yes.
But those kind of dark dark parts are the eyes. And so they believe this was the skull.
Yeah, or Golgotha.
The hill.
The hill of the skull. And
yes.
This would be where Jesus would have been crucified. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there's other places. There's 2 or 3 different places where they believe that it could have happened, but
they don't know exactly.
They don't know.
Because
it was a long time ago.
Yeah, and nobody was living to tell us exactly where it was.
But you have a hill here outside the city, which is where it would have been, the traditional walls, and it looks like a skull. So also in this complex, it's called the Garden Tomb. They have an example of what a tomb that's, basically tombs over there are dug out of the rock, the mountainside. And you remember the stone would have been rolled over the front. And then on the 3rd day when Jesus came, the stone rolled away and he was gone. Mm-hmm. And the angels met the disciples and the women first and then the disciples and said, he's not here.
Right.
And then go meet him in Galilee. So anyway, that was just really cool. And we just ended the trip over here on the southern end of the Temple Mount. There's actually stairs, because this is how people would enter the temple. They'd walk up these stairs and then go through like a tunnel up into the Temple Mount. Of course, the Temple Mount was totally trashed, but the stairs in this area around here is an archaeological park where they've dug up some of the original steps that would be leading up to that temple. Mm-hmm. And we had our last teaching of the trip there, and just were charged with saying, look, you guys, for the last 2 weeks you've been walking in the steps of Jesus, and the whole point was he was trying to make and grow his discipleship base. He started with 12 and then 72, and it just grew from there. And now there's, 3 billion Christian. I mean, it's 30 some percent of the population is Christian now. All started out one man and 12 disciples. Mm-hmm. So we were charged to do that. And that, again, is just something that is very motivating and, part of our dream.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So that's our overview. That's our dream.
Mm-hmm.
And who knows, we're going to probably end up going back to Israel again, don't you think?
Yeah.
It's just something special about it, and it's something we really, really enjoy.
By the way, we didn't tell you half the stuff we did.
Yeah. That you got a little glimpse, but we've got to wrap up this show. So this episode of Hunt4Wellness is brought to you by waterdistillers.com. Great machines that give you great water for your great wellness. Check it out at waterdistillers.com. Our first episode of season 3.
Yes.
In the books, and it's all about dreaming, and I can only dream about what's going to come up the rest of this season. We got a lot of good shows planned for you, and any last words you want to say?
What's your dream? Make it a reality.
Yep.
Move towards it. It's going to be great.
Yep.
It'll bless you.
Right. And we'll see you next time on Hunt4Wellness.